next topic will be users, user management, and permissions. So some of the features I've hinted before a lot of times. Now we will see them in action. So let's get back to the admin. And here you can see that there's a user menu item as well. Now, it won't be a surprise either that, well, here we can see all the users that have registered. You can see that there's this admin user. This is the one that we have created during setup. It was automatically added here. But it doesn't have anything configured apart from the username. So let's see an example of when this is configured and how other users can register. Due to security reasons, by default, orchard sites don't allow registrations. So we need to go to the user site settings, which is under here. And here we need to enable registration by ticking users can create new accounts on the site. There are various options here as well, but you feel free to discover everything else that we haven't covered here. So let's save this, and on another screen, let's create a new user account. Let's try registering here. So I will open our local website in an incognito window, and Benedict will tell me how to do that. Okay, that works. Okay, let's do it again. It was a bit slow, so I didn't know whether it would work. And here we have it. I will just open the site in incognito and try to register. Now, in the default theme, it's a bit buried away, but if you go to sign in, you will see that there's a register link. So that's where we can register. And let's register a new user. So let this user be test, and it will have a test at example.com. Mail address, feel free to use a more exciting one. Password, here will be password as well, because everyone knows that just after password being the password, the second next best security practice is having all of the users having the same password. So let's click register. Automatically we were logged in as well. So you can see again we have this little menu in the footer. But this time we don't have a dashboard link here. And the reason is, of course, that this test user is just a simple user. It's not an administrator. So it can't access the admin. If I would go to /admin with this user, then I just get an access denied page. This is what we await. So this is access control and user permissions working in action. Let's see how we can change this. Let's go back to the admin, but I'm now opening the original window with the admin user logged in. And let's go to the users list again. Now we can see that the test user was created, so that's cool. And when we edit it, we can configure its roles. And by the way, we can see that it now has an email address. What are roles? Roles are part of the permission control system that's built into Orchard. It's of the type role-based access control, which can be familiar for you. And basically, the idea is that we can create roles which are just groups of permissions. These are just a list of permissions that users with that role will possess. So before setting anything here, let's take a look at the roles. I will again open the user screen, and you can see that here's also a roles tab. So roles should be listed somewhere there. And indeed, well, there are several roles, and as you can see, we can delete almost all of them except the administrator role. The reason is that the administrator role is not just a built-in, but rather a system-level role. It's needed because without that, you pretty much would lock yourself out of the admin, and we don't want that. So you can't delete that. But let's take a look at that role. As you can see, here we have a list of permissions. So we are looking at the admin role now and the administrator role, and each of the lines here are separate permissions corresponding to a feature. I mentioned that in Orchard there is a framework. Under this section you can see the permissions created by the framework, the very basic permissions. And these very basic permissions are also quite important. The three most important permissions are the ability to access the admin panel. If a user doesn't have this, then no matter what, they won't be able to do anything on the admin. Except if they have the site owner's permission, which is kind of the God mode. If you have the site owner's permission, you can do anything, everywhere. And there's a separate access site frontend permission, which is to allow you to access, well, everything else apart from the admin to, well, this. As you can see, the administrator has the site owner permission, so nothing else matters here. But there are a lot of other permissions, including one, for example, for the users feature, what we have already used a few minutes ago, a permission to be able to manage the users. And now let's see what happens if I give an administrator role to our test user. And go back to the incognito window and do a refresh. Now the dashboard link is displayed, and if we click there, we can actually log into the dashboard. So this kind of works, which is good because it's a very basic feature. I would be surprised if it would be broken, but well, it can happen. If you take a look at the other roles, we will also see some other basic ones. There is an anonymous role for users who are not logged in. So all the other roles here are for logged in users, but anonymous is the only one for users who are not logged in. And this is quite natural because you can't really distinguish between users who are not logged in, since what are you using to distinguish between them? So there's just one anonymous role, but depending on the user, we can have multiple levels of access for different logged in users. Well, the anonymous role can't access the admin panel, of course, but can access the front end. This is by default, but for example, you could create a website where you say that this is kind of an intranet site or a site for just a closed group, so I won't allow access to the front end for anonymous users. So if we untick this, then the first thing every user will see is a login screen, nothing else. And as we can see, the anonymous role can't really do anything else. Well, there's a view all content permission to actually be able to see content items unless specified otherwise. And by default, they can also add comments. So commenting also allows anonymous comments. This is probably something not usual or not self-explanatory. But if we go back, we can see that there are other roles as well. The authenticated is just for the lowest level authenticated users, and author, contributor, editor, moderator, well, are just different levels. But this should give you an idea. And by the way, we can also create a role just from here on the admin, which will present us with exactly the same editor screen. So you can freely create various access levels just by clicking through the admin again.